Miles Lewis, thank you, and welcome to Sex with Stevie. Miles Lewis is a Los Angeles-based artist, as well as an art and environmental educator. He is also, the reason he contacted me is working closely with the Victory Fund, which we're going to talk a little bit about in just a second. And we share a friend, an artist friend of ours, Miguel Angel Reyes. Miles Lewis, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I mean, it's a little difficult out here in LA because, as you know, we have fires across California. I'm sure you're talking to your family about that. And we don't have fire very near us in the West San Fernando Valley, but because of weather patterns, we have, a very thick smog that's laid out over the city. So it's kind of gross.
Well, it's interesting, or not really interesting, just shocking. In talking to my sister who lives in Oakland, California, Northern California, and we've been doing play-by-play updates about that orange hue that is casted over San Francisco and the Bay Area. And I have to admit, it looks really beautiful, but when you know why, it does. It looks gorgeous, but when you know the reason and why it's happening, it's not. It's sad. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I just hope.
Well, once you smell it and feel it, it loses some of its beauty.
Absolutely. Well, you reached out to me to talk a little bit about something that we don't normally talk so much about, or not so much. I'm a, truth be known, a political junkie and watch politics like all day long in different sources and obsessed, but we've gotten in trouble at times with some of our listeners for talking about that because people want to hear about sex. But you brought up a very important point, and why you're on the show today is that obviously we're in a huge political year, and with all your work with the Victory Fund, and as I mentioned earlier, you work with Run for Something. You're trying to get the vote out. I think my first question to you is, when did you become so political? Because I know you're not that old. And part B of that question is it a myth that young gays people are not as politically involved as the youth of, say, other generations of the 60s?
Well, I think this is a critical point because I do think that there's a difference in intention and attention. So I think for a lot of gay men, I know most of the audience is gay men, so speaking specifically for that, over maybe 35, 40, definitely 50 or 60, they were dealing with the AIDS crisis, dealing with, the gay marriage sort of embattlement that we've had over the past 25 years, and the earlier claims and initiatives for sexual liberation in the 70s, right, previous to AIDS and continuing past it. And just being recognized in the workplace, not being fired from government jobs or from private work. But I think the difference now is that there's a lot of discussion about, gender identity, the extension into trans rights, which has not always been, easily settled next to gay rights on both sides. There's been some conflict. And it's become more global as well. So not just getting ours here in the United States, like we may discuss, in this little segment, around the world, there are still serious issues for gay men, and for the rest of the LGBTQ world. People can be killed, people can be jailed, people are seriously censored. Gay life is, very rigorously censored in a lot of parts of the world, including Europe. And so, sort of turning our eyes outward a little bit beyond our shores, not just thinking about gay rights in the United States, but also thinking about sort of expanding beyond just being able to have, a satisfying sex life, being able to, be comfortably a gay man, which I think we've made a huge amount of progress on. But there are a lot of things around the edges and really substantially beyond just these first things that we've accomplished that we should turn our attention to. And I think that our generation, younger people, I think have a special eye for that.
Absolutely. And, one of the reasons that we'll get into people that in the LGBTQ arena that are running for election, and we'll get into some of the stats because I found that really interesting as well. But, one of the things that I I think sometimes goes unnoticed, particularly in this administration, is all the different legislations that have been overturned under the Trump administration that oftentimes gets overshadowed. Yes, we know that, recently in the Supreme Court, you can no longer discriminate against LGBTQ, and I think that was a huge feat that we should be celebrating. But
it's very specific. It's important to remember that that's pretty specific.
Right, and that's what I want to. That's what I'm saying, and that's what my next question is. Is I was wondering, because when we're celebrating things like that and the headlines that so many of us only see, there's a lot of things in this administration that have been overturned, and I'm just wondering if you could tap into them, including the underlying things of what was just happened in the Supreme Court that many people may not know that could still affect people in the workforce.
Sure. So there was a Supreme Court decision. Let's see if I have the title of it in front of me. What was it? But anyway, it happened earlier this year. I think it was in June. But it was a 6-3 decision with 2 conservatives joining the liberals to include include language about sexual orientation and gender identity in non-discrimination legislation under the Civil Rights Act, which is a huge win. That's actually part of what got the gay rights movement started back in the 50s and 60s. I don't know if you know about the Velvet Scare and Velvet Purges that happened, or the Lavender Scare rather, that happened at that time, where during, when they were trying to get communists out of government, socialists, etc. They're also trying to get gays out. And so up to like 11, 12,000 gay men and women were thrown out of government over the course of 4 or 5 decades. So that was actually one of the big initial traumas that got people motivated and organizing. So it's really the culmination of some of the earliest sort of nationally conscious gay rights efforts that we've had in this country. So it was a really huge win. But yeah, it's super important to specify that it is specific to employment. It doesn't cover housing discrimination. It doesn't cover discrimination in, every other situation in which that can apply. It doesn't cover larger sort of cultural issues, around conversion therapy, the gay panic defense, which is still litigated in courts, which we can describe if you're not aware of it, or the audience wouldn't be aware of it. Gay curriculum laws, there's a lot of anti-gay, anti-sex curriculum laws for elementary, middle, and high schools around the country that are really enshrined in state law. So it's really non-comprehensive, but it is a big win in the scope of what we've tried to do. And what would be the things that may have been overturned in this administration that a lot of people wouldn't know? If you could just give us a when it comes to overturning, it had more to do with overturning certain advisories that came into play during Obama's tenure. So, including, through executive order, including trans people.
I was going to say bathroom
healthcare mandates.
Right.
Yeah, the bathroom, bathroom guidance under the educational administration or the Department of Education, coming in on the side of discrimination when it comes to court cases, like really just in the past 2 weeks. So I think 2 days ago, the Trump administration filed a 36-page brief with the Indiana Supreme Court to support a school's right to fire a teacher for being gay. So it's not so much that they're creating laws that are going on the books that are taking people down, or taking gay people down a notch. It's that they are constantly coming in on the side. They're kind of playing offense where they can and playing defense where they can when it comes up in the courts or when it's a matter of executive action. So we're in the fortunate position that we don't have, not everybody is this way. Like something that I wanted to, that I probably noted in the email that I sent you is that part of why the Trump administration and a good number of conservatives around the country really are trying to say that they're not anti-gay or that they're pro-gay is because they know that a majority of the American public, including a lot of people who vote as Republicans, are okay with gay people. Like, they really don't have a problem with gay people in terms of rights, in terms of privileges. They're okay with it. But there's a specific minority, kind of a conservative religious minority, that is constantly pushing constantly pushing. And it's still a part of the Republican Party platform to oppose gay marriage. They would like to dissolve it if they could. So they're kind of playing a game where the American public is on the side of the gays. But there's, including conservatives, but conservative politicians and conservative policy platforms are still doing whatever they can around the edges in order to make it hard for us to do the total protections that we would want to do, and also to unravel, like you were saying, some of the protections that were put in as suggestions, as amicus briefs in court proceedings, stuff like that. So I think that's most of what Trump has done over the past 3.5 years.
Well, one of the things you work closely with is it's the Victory Institute, correct?
Well, let me correct that. So I think I encourage everybody to check out the Victory Institute and Victory Fund for inspiration, but I don't actually work with them.
Correct.
I work with Run for Something. That's the group, and we have a lot of candidates who are Victory Fund candidates because they're queer candidates. But just to give you a correction there.
Right, and I guess just to be clear on that is one of the ways that in an election year, other than the presidential election, is there's a lot of LGBTQ people running for office that can help change a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. The little things, the more visibility, I think is what you're saying, that we have in office, in various offices, is that we can make changes, and these little things that slide under the cracks won't happen as much. And the Victory Institute, which you just said you don't work for them, but you align yourself with, one of the two things that struck me was in the last year, they did a kind of from 2019 to now, there was a 40% increase in trans women elected, which I thought was like pretty outstanding when I read that number. And 843 known LGBTQ elected was the overall, and there was a 53% increase in bisexual. I point those out, trans and bi, because those are sometimes in our, we call ourselves gay sex podcast, but those are oftentimes not given a lot of attention, and I think we should give a little bit more to that. What would be some of the things that we should pay attention to in this, either people in various states that are running in the LGBTQ arena that we should be looking out for because
Sure.
I think so many of us are going to just be voting, and we're going to be voting, hopefully not for Trump, but we're not looking at the other things that we could be voting for. So what's some things you can point out to us?
Sure. Well, let me just quickly complete that idea about federal government. So everybody here has of course you have people outside of the U.S. But for all your U.S. listeners, for your congressperson, for your senator, reach out to them and ask them to support the Equality Act, which is House Bill 5. It passed the House last year, and you can find all the details on it, but that is the most comprehensive pro-gay legislation that would ever have been passed, I think, by any country, but by definitely, the U.S., and it covers almost everything that we are fighting for.
Say that again.
The other, it is called the Equality Act.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So check that out. And then the Globe Act, which was put forward by Ed Markey, the senator, and I forget who the congressman was. But this puts forward the U.S. as a leader on gay rights diplomatically, fighting for the decriminalization of LGBTQ people all around the world. So that would be a mandate for what we do as a diplomatic state, as a civil rights and freedom and justice and equality interested country.
And so when we're writing to our senators, say for the first one you mentioned, the Equality Act, which is working on things like house discrimination in most situations, you write, adoption with an eye towards foster care, you wrote to me, conversion therapy, anti-gay curriculum laws. What are we really writing to them and saying?
You're saying, I please support the Equality Act. Again, imagine most of your listeners here are gay.
Yes.
I'm a gay man who's one of your constituents. please put your name down for the Equality Act. Please fight for it as hard as you can. I'm on your side. Know that I'm there. That kind of thing.
Okay.
That really matters. That really matters.
The more visibility.
And hopefully you have people who've already voted. Hopefully you have representation who've already voted. But that and the Globe Act, which I think is less talked about, but I think it's super important because while we care about, getting rid of conversion therapy here and making schools, friendlier for gay kids, there are parts of the world where people are being rounded up and killed.
Right, you're right. 70 countries, I know this, but it's worth mentioning again, 70 countries criminalize safe-sex sexual relations, if we can still believe that. More than a third of UN member states in the UN here that criminalize consenting adult same-sex sex, and in up to 10 countries, punishable in some by death. Anti-LGBTQ propaganda laws in 3 countries. So these are things worth mentioning in that we should also be considering in the other thing you mentioned, the Global Act, that we could also be writing to our local senators, correct?
Yeah, so that would be your congressperson and your senator. So find who they are, write just send them an email about this, and that's all you got to do right now. And say if this comes to the floor again, and it becomes kind of a battle, say, count on me as somebody that you can reach out to as one of your gay constituents. That kind of stuff can be helpful. So simple thing to do. But so moving on from that, from the large federal pieces of legislation, I think you were asking about the candidates that are running, or
is there any specific candidates that might be running that you might want to profile real quick? Sure thing. So 5 candidates, and then I'll explain a little bit why I think gay representation matters so much. Not just having allies. Well, we know that, but yes.
So Jabari Brisport, you may have heard of him. So he ran for New York Senate in Brooklyn, and is likely to go. He won his primary. So I think that he's gay or queer, black. He's a democratic socialist. He has a lot of interesting things on his platform. He's very focused on housing, public school teacher. And something that you find about a lot of queer candidates, apart from you caring about queer and LGBTQ issues, is that they often think about things differently, or they add other things to their platforms that most people don't. So he's a huge animal rights advocate. And he has this very comprehensive platform how New York State can help to support its dying dairy industry by switching over to plant-based milks, subsidizing that, and it all has a positive environmental benefit, but helping a dying industry by transitioning into the future. So he's one candidate. There's Jessica Benham, who's running for Pennsylvania State Representative, and she's autistic in addition to being, I believe she's a lesbian, or she's on the queer spectrum. And she actually runs an organization, or is part of the management of an organization called the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy. And so they're super focused on how autistic people and all their specific gifts, it's recognized as a dysfunction or a disorder, but there are all these gifts that go along with autism that should really be lifted up. People with autism are part of the workplace, they're part of families, they're part of society broadly. So she's working on that line of advocacy too. And I think there's just this out-of-the-box thinking that I think a lot of queer people have that's super important for all kinds of human rights. Taylor Small is a transgender woman who's running for Vermont State Representative. She's likely to get it. I think she won her primary. And she works at the Pride Center of Vermont. So she's a part of sort of LGBTQ service programs. And there are a lot of people who are, who spent years in the Pride Center, working, building their communities, who are now running to make legislation for their states or craft policy for their cities. Yeah.
I only have a few minutes with you, but I want, if you can send me a list, we will post the list of people to look out for across the country on tagspodcast.com, and because I think it's really important. We have listeners all over the country, and I think it's really important, including how we should write to our senators. Real quick though, I know you do a lot of work environmentally, which I think is really good, and I have my straw here if you're watching Facebook Live, which is non-paper. And real quick, just tell us, how did you get into environmental concerns and politics at such a young age?
Well, I was kind of freaked out by the Trump election. I came from a pretty non-political family, fairly Republican, fairly libertarian, and a great family. So I grew up well, and I had no issues with that. But I realized that this was, perhaps our biggest challenge, and one that undergirds a lot of other things. When I think about environmental rights, I also think about the rights of bodies and the rights for sexuality, right? I think of living in a society that recognizes the natural world for what it is, including ourselves as bodies and animals with, sexuality and agency and vulnerability. So I'd already had that sensitivity. I already thought a lot about the natural world and how important these things are, and how we get in our way about just enjoying being living beings. So that was already a part of the sensitivity, and just realizing that they're very pressing, when it comes to climate change or plastic pollution or species extinction and things like this. And so it all kind of came together for me as something that I want to, this is the world that I want to live in, the world that I want to advocate for. And as an artist and also as a gay man, I think that I have maybe some special insights on how I can help the larger environmental movement be successful. So it seems very reasonable and practical for me to pursue as well.
And we should talk real briefly about your art. You can follow, I put it on your tag right there, Miles Lewis Art on Instagram, and of course mileslewisstudio.com. Your art is really evocative and powerful and sexy, and I'm just going through a lot of your images, and it's really awesome. I love. Have you gotten more into your art in this pandemic period, or is this just the same for you? Nothing's really changed.
Well, it's a little bit of both. I'm the kind of artist who just sort of continuously produces things, drawing and painting. So I'm always making drawings and paintings. But the pandemic allowed me to work on a couple of projects that I'm sort of deep in now. One is a book about a kid who changes society into a zero-waste society. So like a little sort of fantasy environmental piece of poetry with images. And then, outside of that, that's kind of the big one. And then there's some public art projects. So luckily, there's some murals that have come in that are environmentally themed that I'm working on now. None of which is on my Instagram just yet, but if you do follow me, you'll be able to see some of what it is. And it's a difficult thing, probably for you too, Steve, anybody who's creative, to find that bridge between your political and social passions and sort of just your joyful creativity. It takes a while to figure out the right pacing for that, so that art feels purposeful, and that just the things that you enjoy, the joy of life, also doesn't feel too light. You kind of want to find that middle path that gives everything substance.
Miles Lewis, I want to thank you so much.